welcome all to this exciting session of Sattology, debunking mythology. I have a very special guest today. He's a very good friend of mine, and I want all of you to know him, and especially in the university circles where some of you are going through different courses, and we want to introduce you to him as well. And probably, we all can learn something from him through this channel. So without delay, I bring out Mr. Bryan Maryott.
Good evening, Adi.
Good evening.
And to your viewers.
We are wonderful, thank you. So before we start off, just want to tell the viewers that Bryan is running for CA49, and he has been very closely involved with the community. And today in this session, just like last time you heard other people, Daralisa, in this session we're going to talk to him about his personal life, a little bit public life, and also more about what he thinks about different things that are important to all of us. So welcome, Bryan.
Thank you, Adi. It's nice to be with you. And the 49th, if the folks watching don't know, spans from Del Mar, Solana Beach area through northern San Diego County, all the way up into to Dana Point, picking up 4 communities in Orange County. And Daryl, who you apparently had on your last broadcast, how lucky for the folks watching, they get 2 politicians in a row with you, Adi. But Daryl sat in the seat for 18 years, and he stepped away a couple of years ago. And a gentleman went in named Mike Levin, who's a Democrat. I'm a Republican, and we're working very hard to unseat Mike before he settles in and sticks around. And so we're just working hard every day at it, and it's a pleasure to be on with you.
Yeah, thank you, Bryan. So Bryan, I met your family, and I see the values that you have are very close to the Hindu values, actually very simple, where Hindu values deal with equality, dharma, and truth and justice. And I've seen you very closely. You also stand for the same values.
You know, I think that's true, and I think it's really the foundational values, I believe, of our country. I think our forefathers were absolutely brilliant. I mean, we both our countries of origin escaped from the British mothership different ways, revolution here, partition there, and, but same thing, we break clean. And I think the gentleman who founded our country really designed something, very conservative constitutional documents that were designed to create a country that would go for thousands of years, inspiring justice for all and personal liberty and, individualism and a great respect for everyone's communication rights and what they have to say and how they practice their faith and what they believe. And I also think quite brilliantly, they designed it to withstand the worst things about human nature can come into play. In any civilization, there's some bad apples. And so I think I, as an individual, I'm 57, I've lived a lot of life, and I see the magic of our country now. And I think the party that I've been a part of for almost 30 years, the Republican Party, best captures the essence of that and is the more inspirational party in terms of the way forward in the future.
A Republican Party, whenever they have been in power, and recently one of the Hindu priests was in White House, invited by President Trump, and he did a lamp ceremony for President Trump, and it was primarily done to ensure a prayer from the Hindus that he has a long life. And that went very deep with the Hindu community. This is the 3rd time it has happened. In the last 4 years, 3 years, every year the Diwali greetings by the President Trump to the Hindu community has gone much deeper with the entire community in a big way. Recently, also before the during the coronavirus time, White House called for a prayer meet, and they did invite a priest from Virginia, and that has gone very well with a large Hindu community today in the USA.
Yeah, I think there's a beauty in being proud of your faith, being seeped in your faith, and being willing to be uh, uh, honest about it as as a public servant and a public person, and not feel that you have to calibrate it for any audience. And I think Trump understands that. I didn't see the moment you referencing, but I've anecdotally have picked up some things obviously about that, and the trips the president's made and the connection with Modi, and I just today career politicians will calibrate that. They will, seems to me that the more dogmatically hard left part of the Democrat Party will not reference God anymore in their communications in any way. And I think that's exactly what our country is not about. You're free to express yourself. You're just not free to impose your will on others or use your faith as some sort of inspiration to do bad and think you're more superior in allowing you to do it, and draw on your faith in the wrong ways. And obviously through history, in all faiths, we've seen people do that. But I think they're genuinely people who are just not fundamentally decent people at the core, and the faith or the phony faith is just part of the packaging, used rather diabolically. But it has been interesting to watch this president and the connection with Prime Minister Modi, and see a little bit of a resparking of a sense of pride in your country, and obviously they both have high expectations to fill. Whenever you tap into a nerve of discontent, you have to fill those expectations or meet those expectations with people, and they're working so hard to do it. But we have this horrible timeout, which is a terrible virus, but it has been so disruptive, and it's unfortunate because you'd like to see the continued progression, and part of that progression is the developing, I think, reevaluation of the relationship between U.S. and India, and whether it's a checkmate with China or whether it's just a recognition of the capability of the relationship and the possibility for increased interdependence and the healthy nature of that. Everything just feels like it's getting timed out. All the great progress we'll have to see.
No, I think we are going to come back and much stronger. Because everything, these kind of problems can have a silver lining also.
Yeah.
And we all will come out together very strong. One of the things which Indian community has always supported President Trump is the freedom, because one of the core Hindu values is country first. So by Hindus, by nature, wherever they live, for them that land is more important. And so they're grateful to that land. So one thing, if you ask any Hindu American, they will be more than willing to fight for the country, die for the country. This is the core values of Hindus.
Yeah.
And it's like a religious duty. Just like owning an arm is a religious duty for most of the Hindus. So weapons is they worship weapons once a year. So in that regard, it's Hindus will always, as a community, will always stand behind a person. That's your core values. And anyone who is loving the country, they will be naturally core behind it. Core will be behind them. In that regard, the leftist combination is completely rejected philosophically. So naturally, they have only one choice left, to go with the mainstream persons like you, who are looking for a balance, not just either left or right. It's somewhere in the middle. Do you have
there's been a lot written about the historical tendency to vote Democrat with Indian Americans that's changing, and then you see at least what I've seen, longtime Democrat strategists don't seem to understand it well. And I think that part of what they're missing, Adi, is that it's Hindus and Indian Americans. There is a lot of similarity there with values, the work ethic, the sense of duty and responsibility. And I think what Democrats don't recognize, at least the hard left, is that there's no way to make a population that believes that way dependent in any way on their foolishness. And whether their heart's in the right place or not, when you make people dependent on the government as opposed to inspiring them to be entrepreneurial, which my sense is another commonality between Hindus and Americans, and that idea of optimism, as optimism almost as part of the duty, to recognize, that we have to be optimistic, we have to assume the best. And that is just more naturally in line with our foundational principles. And I think the Republican Party, which says, limit government, let people rely on the best within them and their inspirations and their core beliefs. And we're a very benevolent country, the U.S., and very gracious and a wealthy country. And I don't want anyone to fall through the cracks. I mean, sometimes you might have to get your shoe stuck in a crack once in a while, to understand life's lessons a little bit. But we don't want anybody slipping through the cracks, right?
That's
and
right.
So the truly non-able-bodied, and in certain situations, we have to, we provide a little assistance here and there. But that's much different than creating a lifestyle with assistance and with programs and so forth, which I think is unhealthy. And by the way, I think it's cruel, Adi. I think the cruelest thing you can do to another human being is give them just enough to survive.
That's right.
I don't know if you want to touch on the California situation at all, but the jeopardy we're developing now with this overwhelming shutdown and the sort of torturous exit from it is going to result in a massive deficit situation, and it's going to be a bunch of the states, and that's going to then be dependent on the federal government for massive bailouts, and they're probably going to make that a campaign issue. And along the way, they're going to sap the energy and spirit enthusiasm of millions of people along the way. And I'm not sure they recognize that. I'd like to believe that they don't, because if they do recognize it, then it's just nakedly political.
No, you're absolutely right. See, the scourge of the left is very similar in India as well as in US. Very similar. I think the left is left whether it's in India or here, and they control the media as in India as well as here. They control the mainstream media. In fact, one point, as I was discussing before you, the biggest concern for the freedom of free speech is going to come from social media giants banning people whom they don't find them agreeing to them. And this has been happening in the US at an alarming rate. I saw one of the campaigns, the candidates, their Facebook page was banned. And before that, somebody was banned on Twitter. And people, very sane voices, they speak the right thing which people are actually feeling. But there is there's a freedom of expression there. So one of the things which I wanted to also ask you, that is there a policy can be made so that the free speech of people is protected by the law, even if the platforms are private, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, so I've said for some years now that social media and the internet in general has been a little bit like the Wild West. And I'm not a big government regulation guy. I believe that government sets a few guardrails, but where it's important and necessary is obviously public safety. And then when it comes to the world of commerce, you want to require outcomes and business practices that are simply consistent with our Constitution and our rights. And that's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. But every time in the last 12, 15 years that discussions start to spike a little bit about internet regulation and various stuff like that, that interest group is already so powerful and so moneyed that they can really influence the conversation very, very quickly. I think it's probably one of those things where the innate ability of Americans to kind of sniff out what's going on and clamor for some change, and then some third parties start, a competing business and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and maybe it's a different world for that 6, 8, 10 years from now. The problem we have with the sort of dogmatically hard left is I'm not sure, within 6, 8, 10 years, if they had their way, we would be looking at a largely socialized economy in this country, including 100% government-run healthcare, which I think would be terribly disastrous. And then you're trying to turn a ship around of 340 million people, and that's very, very hard to do. There is obviously some media coming about, but we're nowhere near balance yet in any way.
So I pointed out in one of my books as well, as a society, India has lived on, or the Indian culture comes from the position of dharma and arthashastra. Arthashastra is an Indian word for economics treatise, like economic science. Mm-hmm. And from thousands of years, Indian history is way older than anything which the world talks about. So in India, dropping 1,000 years here and there is nobody questions. But in US, if you do that, then people question. So in India, it's the longest living civilization. So their history books are way different than American history books. They go from 5,000 years back, they start, and then, so almost like 2,500 years back, this book was written on economics. And one of the things they say that the government should not get involved in private business. And that is written 2,600 years back, before Jesus was born. Yeah. And secondly, the king should, I've quoted in my book also, the king should be like a father to the whole population, or the president, or you can put any term right now. But the smaller government is the must for the president or king or prime minister to survive. So this concept of small government is historical. It's not just something new that we are asking, or which a GOP or anyone is campaigning for. Mm. The only thing which the sage Narada advises Yudhishthir is that he says, Yudhishthir is the name of the king to which he is talking to, and he says that your only work is to tax less, that the taxes should not be more than 25% to the people. You should not interfere in private business. Your only job is to run courts and the external security of the state so that people can be happy and there can be free social mingling. This is what was written 2,600 years back. So when I compare that to the current words of the local, especially the people who are in the GOP, it's the music to my ears, because what I wrote in my book, quoting 2,600 years back, is actually people are campaigning for. So when you say smaller governments, less taxation, and free enterprise, it is nothing new. It is something which is more commonsensical. Yeah. And some of the hard left is opposed to that. Yeah, go ahead. You're saying something.
I think heavy-handed government represents a consolidation of power. And there's a lot of things that are consistent over the centuries, but one thing, inconsistent, pardon me, but one thing that's extremely consistent is human nature and human behavior. And I think it's a recognition that if you consolidate power, if if government runs industry, government has immense power, which means a select group of people have immense power. And it's interesting to hear that historical um, analysis or the background. It's a wonderful learning moment for me, but it doesn't surprise me in the sense that that's a time-tested truth, that if you let one group of people begin to acquire power, human nature is it becomes corruptive. And we have an example of that going on in our state of California right now, which is it's a little bit paralyzing, and people have really no access to state government, which is where the power sits right now relative to this health scare. And we have the possibility that 30% of our small businesses are lost. So I mean, some of these great truths are so time tested, and they usually speak to human nature. And to me, that one does, that they recognize thousands of years that it's not wise to have anybody who has some administrative authority bestowed to them in one way or the other to get their hands in the flow of money and goods and all that means to people and their livelihoods, because it just represents opportunity to them. By the way, it's interesting, the U.S. and India, this remarkable history with India, and then this short history with the U.S., two very different histories, and yet both countries were thought by most to would not survive.
That's right.
And that's that foundational. You talk about the Hindu faith and that resilience and that sense of duty. That is what, when you look at the sacrifices and the personal sacrifices, serving the country, military sacrifices. I think that's part of the core elements, right? And the shared values. And it's for very different reasons, but it was thought by the global elites that's there today. I guess today we'd call them the global elites. I don't know what they called them, in 47 and in 76, but they really didn't think the countries would survive. And so I think part of that resilience and that work ethic is a big one. And that's, that's, I think, so much in common that way and so much to be proud of.
Absolutely. And you touched upon some good point, is like a pointer. So India, in the modern times, India is the largest democracy. And in the modern times, the oldest democracy is US. But in India, the rule of people has been there for centuries, maybe before the British came. And during the time of British, it got a little bit corrupted because of various things. But one thing is constant, that Indians have remained a spiritual group of people. Hindus have retained their spirituality, they have never given up. And the same thing, I think, the faith which drives the US and which is very attractive for many Hindus as well. But as India is growing, many Indians are also now getting better opportunities within India. So this is the attractiveness of US is somewhat leveling up right now in many ways to India. Now, but yes, go ahead, please.
No, please. And I think that's a very, very healthy thing. And it's obviously it's amazing opportunity. I think there's amazing opportunity for the two countries to develop a working partnership that's, way beyond what it has been historically, whether it's, a military partnership, a commerce partnership, and just exchange of ideas. I mean, I think it's a remarkable time for that to come about. And then from a simply, geopolitical, practical necessity point of view, the way China has pounded her chest a bit and expanded her ambition a bit and proven, I think, somewhat in over the last 10 years that, it's still a closed communist government and effectively a lifelong dictator at this point, with great designs to be, the world's military and economic sole superpower. There's also the need to have the countries well aligned and partnering really well. So hopefully that will come about. It's nice to see two leaders that have been inspirational to people in the countries come together and I guess in the corporate world we'd say share best practices. But I mean, you can tell they really dig in with each other and share ideas. And like I said, they both have a lot of expectation on them, and it will be interesting to see. And I'm very optimistic for both countries.
No, with as far as the Indo-US ties goes, they're on a very firm footing, and Hindu Americans, American Hindus from almost like a large community here, very large community, they all feel the same. And one of the things which uh, most of the American Hindus they feel that the threat to them is right now uh, coming from those people who are on the ultra left side. They are the people biggest threat in many ways. Other than that, everything is going good. One of the areas where the American Hindus have contributed a lot in the relationship with India and other countries, because India is actually sitting in the middle in the Indian Ocean and controlling three oceans together.
Mhm.
It's like a bridging point. And one of the things which India has been wanting to do is is a recognition from US in many ways for the old maritime stabilizing force in that area. That's one thing which President Trump has given by renaming the entire Asia Pacific to Indo Pacific region. He has already done it in the last administration.
Yeah.
And so many people are very thankful for that. My last question to you, and also to know more about you, what is that drives you? Your family, you're a wonderful family person, and you have great faith, and you have good traditions. And I met your family briefly in the Republican winning party of yours, where you won the nomination.
Yeah.
And so, what drives you as a family, and how you keep everyone happy around you?
Well, the happy part may vary from day to day a little bit, because Michelle knows that we're kind of into the home stretch now at about the 6 month mark or less, and I think she can see it in my face here a little bit now and then. But my family has been wonderfully supportive. I worked in the field of politics in my late 20s and early 30s, but I just felt I wanted a more normal career path and went back to financial services for many years, worked with families, business owners, enjoyed management. And then when I came back to public service as a candidate and served on council and then mayor of San Juan Capistrano, our little city in Orange County, it re-inspired and sort of at this stage in my life, it's sort of finding my why, as my last working chapter. And part of it is, I think, is being a parent, and you project beyond. And a lot of it, I think, Adi, is you when you look at our country today, you see some temptation for the country to path a different direction and to veer off the foundational principles of our country a bit. And you wouldn't be quite so worried if they didn't have the media along with them, helping them do it. But I do believe it's a fundamental threat, and the loss of 70 or 80% of the media to hold elected officials and people in power accountable, especially if those people happen to believe the way the editors and the publishers and the company executives believe, that's a bit frightening to me. And selfishly, I want my children and their children to grow up in the same world with the same opportunities. I enjoy public service. Believe it or not, I enjoy campaigning, particularly when I can. And this is as good as it gets for now, and it's nice to be with you. But I enjoy meeting people. We go to door, and I tell my team, knocking on a door is like a box of chocolates. You just don't know what you're going to get. And but it inspires me every day, and this is what I'll do now the rest of the ride.
No, I really value you as a person, and you have been a very warm, fabulous person, and your family. It's a great example, a person like you in a public life. And
Thank you.
thank you very much for your time today.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have anything else to add as a last message?
This is grateful to be on with you. And folks who are curious more about the campaign, Maryott is Maryott. They can go to marriottforcongress.com and have a look. And I look forward to being with you again in the near future, Adi.
All right. Thank you so much. I think coming Tuesday.